Today's episode is sponsored by Republic Boot Company of Houston, Texas. Republic Boot Company has made boots for the likes of Joe Ely, Tom Russell, and Ramblin' Jack Elliott. They've even made a pair of boots for me, and right now they're working on a pair of boots for my wife. I'll keep you updated on those as the boots are coming along, and if you follow me on social media, I'll try to share some pictures of the progress. You can order your own custom-made boots at republicbootcompany.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Western Folklife Center in Elko, Nevada, who provided a space for me to record this interview during the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering. You can find out more about the Western Folklife Center at westernfolklife.org. I'd like to start today's show with a poem written by today's guest, DW Groethe. This piece is entitled 50 a Day. 50 a day is a cowboy's pay. It ain't much, though for some it's enough. It's not always money that rides a man hard or acquiring piles of stuff. There are those who would willingly trade it all in for a chance to go riding the herd. And being out in the lonesome, not feeling alone, that's something you can't put in words. No, this is one of them things that money can't buy. Though they wouldn't say no to a raise, you can still bet they'll give more than they get and be happy till the end of their days. 'Cause being a cowboy is like saying, I'm broke, a pretty good chunk of the time. But broke ain't a shame. It's part of the game. Just a fool thinks broke is a crime. And you know it's no sweat. The hours they get will sometimes be tired and long, but when they hit the hay at the end of the day, what they've earned is the sweetest of songs. Oh, there's always those times when the best that you do simply will not be enough. There are things in this world that'll flat make you blue. But that's life, and sometimes it's rough. Yeah, 50 a day, a cowboy's pay. More than enough for a few who heed not the call of that old 9 to 5, and they can laugh around broke, tired, and blue. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy west and beyond. My guest today is DW Groethe. DW is a ranch hand, a poet, and a songwriter. He makes his home in Bainville, Montana, and he has performed at the National Folk Festival, the Kennedy Center, and the Library of Congress. I sat down with DW during the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada, and recorded this interview. Here's DW Groethe.
My dad was a son of immigrants from Norway. And both my grandfathers were born in 1868. Which a lot of people find odd, but the guys in my family have a tendency to marry late or not at all. So they came over from Norway, and eventually my grandfather, my dad's dad, homesteaded in the northwest corner of North Dakota. Basically, and we've still got the farm. My brothers and sister and I we still own the farm. Their youngest son was my dad. And in those days, the oldest son got it all. So my uncle, his only brother, ended up with the farm. So my dad ended up enlisting in the service. He gets in the Army, and he gets done with boot camp and everything. He's waiting for orders, and then World War II started. So he was off overseas. He was overseas first to Ireland, and then the entire African campaign into Sicily, up into Italy. And then in Italy, he was blown apart by an 88. He got sent back to stateside. I mean, he got lucky that they got him right away. And that's where he met my mom, was an Army hospital in Rock Island, Illinois. Well, actually right across the creek, right across the Mississippi. And she was an RN. And eventually they got married, 48. I came around a year later, 49. You know, I was raised in a town, but we had the family farm, and there was critters out there, everything else like that. So I got used to, you know, rural living. It was in way northwest North Dakota. It's about 10 miles from the Montana line, about 50 miles from Canada. It gives you a little point there. We still own it, my one brother and sister and I, but none of us are farmers. I went ranching, eventually, after a lot of rambling. Basically what I've been my whole life is kind of like you. I sing songs, I do poems, I tell stories. But that left a lot of, you know, a lot of times that just doesn't pay the bills.
I've noticed that.
Yeah. And I've never been one of those who, you know, money has never been a high priority, having millions and like that. I mean, if I have enough that's, you know, I can get by comfortably, you know, and have some set aside, that's fine with me. I never strive to be a millionaire, but I love telling a story and I love singing a song. And as a matter of fact, after my mom died, and then I was the executor, if you ever have trouble with any one of your kids, make them the executor. That you can reach from the grave and come back out and say, I'm getting even. It's just a mess. Anyway, I found this box in my mom's dresser. Kind of just a little jewelry box, a little wood thing. And I opened it up, and it was poems and a short story that I written before I knew cursive. So there was just this kid's printing, right? So I figured I was at best second grade. She said I started asking for a piano when I was 4. And they finally got me one they had a store, the co-op store, food store. When they were built and they opened up, they had a grand prize of a used car, but a good car, filled with groceries and stuff. My mom won it. And that's what got me my piano for second grade, because they said you were always asking for a piano. So from second grade on, that's where my music started. I mean, I've done this pretty much my entire life. And I'm 70 this year. You know as well as I do, it's one of those things you have to do. You know, a lot of people don't understand it. I can't get by a day without some music or some poetry or something, and I'm doing it for myself if nobody else. I think that's just inherent in you. I mean, you make music because you have to make music. You write because you have to write. Something inside does that. My mom was artistic as the dickens. She could make stuff and just everything but painting. She didn't do any painting, but if it's creative with your hands, you like sculpture. Like she was really good at that. My dad played fiddle. And he could sing. I mean, there's that kind of talent in the family. And by the time I got to grade school, my youngest brother was in grade school, in grade 1. We were all taking some kind of lessons. My sister and I both took piano lessons. One brother, Alan, he wanted to learn how to play drums, so he had a snare drum. And then my youngest brother played cornet. And we come from a musical family. But I'm the one that basically, you know, I made a life out of it. And it's kind of nice. If you're a musician, it's, you know, as well as I do, it's night work 99% of the time. And it's probably a brief gig. I've done bands where it's 4 or 5 hours a night and things like that, but I haven't done that. I quit that in 98, and everything was just solo after that. And you know as well as I do that that leaves a lot of time in the day. You know, and you can spend X amount of time writing, but it led to a really interesting life because I've done a lot of different kind of day jobs before I ended up moving on. I've been a photographer, worked as a photographer's assistant for a bunch of years. Just a little bit of everything. I worked in radio for a while. I got, like the old line, I got a face just made for radio. But I like those kind of things. And then, you know, we'd do the AM radio voices, you know, hi there, we're back in town, you know, that kind of a forced voice. But through all my, the one commonality throughout my entire life has been music and poetry. It's because you do what you have to do.
You studied theater.
I have a degree in theater, yeah. I originally, so I lived dead center almost of the North American continent, right? Williston, North Dakota is where I was born and raised. And Rugby is kind of the center, and that's only a couple hours away from me. Growing up, all I wanted to do, and I mean right from when I was in grade school, and I can blame it on my mom's mom, because they used to go down to Florida all the time. And then they bring back seashells and things like that, and she'd give them to me. And it just fascinated me. So I wanted to be a marine biologist. And I really pursued that, all the way till I got out of high school. But when I was in high school is when I started really writing music and doing, gigs and things like that. And when I got out, I went to college for a semester, and then I joined a band and went for a year with that. And that's what kind of turned things around. Then when I came back and I went back to school, I got into theater. And from that time on, after 68, starting in 69, I was a keyboard player. I still am. That's my primary instrument. But the guitar, I went hitchhiking. I had hair down to, here and there and everywhere. I got a picture here if you want to see it. Anyway, I went hitchhiking, and you can't hitchhike with a piano. It's just damn tricky. So I decided, I picked up a guitar. Actually, I borrowed a buddy's guitar, and I went on the road and taught myself how to play. I took all the songs that I knew on the keyboards that I wanted to play on a lot of country music, some folk music, which, what's the difference sometimes. And I taught myself how to play guitar. Took me about a year, and then I went to playing gigs. Folk houses, and I'd be in country bands, things like that. I bought some keyboards. So when I was in bands, I generally played, 99% of the time I was playing keyboards. And but I do solo work, and when I did solo work, then I did guitar work. That was like pretty much the 70s. That's what I did. But in 78, I went back to school, January, at the University of North Dakota, and I finished up my degree. And I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts as a director in theater. Which, if you look at me, you guess that right away. And it was a great time. But I ended up getting into theater and not going for a degree in marine biology like I was originally, we were talking about and got sidetracked here. Because really that's what I am. I love my sciences. I still read books on marine biology. I love it. I love the business of it and everything else. But what I am is this. And you know as well as I do, as soon as you pick up and you start playing, something inside you starts vibrating, and it's just, In the 70s, and I got that degree in May of 80, Bachelor of Fine Arts in theater and direction. The 80s were like, I refer to them as a kidney stone of a decade. Well, that's a quote from Doonesbury. It was like my least productive decade. There's 10 years like I went, what was the purpose of the dang thing? And I still don't know. I worked radio, and I worked as a photographer's assistant that's pretty much what I did for a livelihood during those times. Even though I was playing full-time, as well as I do, it's hard to make a living playing music. So I was doing music and that stuff, and I did pretty well. But then in 1991, I ended up moving over across the border into Bainville, Montana, as I was going with a gal there at the time. And I got a little house over there, rented it. When I got that house, I didn't know the guy and his wife that I eventually bought it from. Really nice people and great people. And he had this little house he was a rancher, big rancher, and he had hired hands, things like that, and they'd stay in this house. But he got a local boy to work over there for him, a local fella, and he already had a house, so he was just planning on renting this out, and he'd rented it out for a while. So I went out to talk to him about, renting the place. I knew it was open. And he said, I don't really want to rent it, but I will sell it. And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to stay here. I don't know if I really want to buy it. And he goes, finally, well, I'll tell you what. I'll charge you, he says, it's $125 a month for the house. And he threw the lot in next to it, so I had 2 lots together on a corner. And he said, for as long as you stay there, I'll just take that off as a house payment as opposed to, straight rent. So he sold it to me. I stayed. I just fell in love with just living in Montana and that little community. It was really nice. Still nice. And he figured out interest rates, what the bank was charging for a home loan. So he figured that into the whole deal. So I bought everything I have for, I don't know, about $4,000, maybe something like that. It's an old house. It's a wonderful place. I hang on to it because it's the only thing around there anymore that's older than me. No, I digress, I guess. But I moved in there, and although I've been playing gigs for and myself since I was, in high school. And I got out of high school in '67. And I've always written music. I've always written poetry. It's just kind of neat. You do what you have to do. So there's something in everybody's spirit that drives them. And as long as some outside influence doesn't come in and try and crush it, you get something good out of it. My parents were, great parents because they saw something in you, they let it nurture. Which is why I got a piano. When my mom won the big prize for this store that opened up, a co-op store, and it was a used car, but a good car. Used car full of groceries and all sorts of other stuff. And my mom won it. And I've been asking for a piano all those years. And this is her telling the story. She said the phone rang, I picked it up. She goes, oh, really? And she goes, Harold, my dad, says, I just won that car full of groceries down there. She said, my eyes perked up. And she said, the reason your eyes perked up is that she'd taken me to the grocery store one day. And I asked her about that car full of, there was a lot of things in there that were non-perishable items, food-wise, and then other stuff. And I said, what's that for? And she explained it to me. It was the grand prize for the opening of the grocery store. I said, you get to win that? She goes, yeah. And we had 2 cars. And I said, if we win that, can I have a piano? And she said, yeah. She's figuring there's no way she was ever going to win that deal, right? She won it. And she said, when she told my dad, she goes, Harold, I won that car full of groceries down at the co-op. She said, my eyes lit up, and she said, I knew you had a piano. Pretty cool.
After pursuing a variety of occupations to support his music, DW Groethe moved to Bainville, Montana, and became a cowboy. The late Texas cowboy poet J.B. Allen wrote a poem about those that are called to the cowboy life, entitled Alchemists. The last 2 stanzas of the poem say this: Do stars cross in heaven when men are conceived, to single 'em out from the pack? Imbued with the knowledge of cattle and land, surveyed from a cow pony's back. They come from all over to wagons and camps, as green as the early spring grass. A faller in their dreams, much too real to ignore. Forging gold from plain pewter and brass.
That really came around when I moved over to Montana. I would help people beforehand because I have lots of friends who are farmers and ranchers. You can't live in the rural community without having them. So I really, when it took over my life was when I moved to Montana, and I just started looking for work because I was in radio business at that time and I didn't want to stay in. That's one thing about a rural community. Somebody needs a hand fencing, somebody needs cow work done to the, and eventually it just kind of worked into a full-time gig. And I like it a lot because, you know, I used to make a joke about it. I said, you get to spend a lot of time by yourself. You're out there with just you and God and, you know, a bunch of stupid heifers. And I always liked the idea that I could say, I'm going fencing. Does anybody want to come with? And people just go, I like fencing because you're out there by your lonesome. Well, it's just you and God. That's it. And I never minded fencing at all. And it just, and by going into cowboying and being able to spend all that time out there, because you can work and sing songs, you know, you've done it. Do poems, work on poems, come down with ideas. That's when my music really, and poetry really took off. That's all I did. I just did full time, went cowboying, and it was just the right fit for me. I was never great, you know, with a rope, but not everybody can be. You know, I can rope, I can get myself in trouble real quick. I've done it, but I'm the guy that writes about it. Somebody has to have a talent. You know, and it's easy fixing fence, you know, 99% of the time, and running ideas through your head. You know, you're just going along. Yeah, I used to like fencing because I could get a lot of work done two ways and get the dang fence done and get songs and poems written at the same time. And when you're out in the country, 100 miles away from everybody, you can be singing all, you can run through poetry out loud. Doesn't make a lick of difference because, you know, who's caring, you know, who's listening. That was a natural bent for me, is to go cowboying. And I never regretted the turn, ever.
Were you working steady for one place, or were you doing more like a day working for
kind of day working
places?
At the start, because I'd never gone cowboying, you know, I did. So somebody give me a holler, you know, hey, we got a fencing job, or we got to do, maybe they're out, you know, working calves, or working the whole darn herd, maybe, you know, spring work, vaccine, whatnot. But eventually, I worked for one outfit for about 2 years, and then I hired on to another one for, I don't know, 13 or 14 years before I just started pulling back. It got to the point where somebody asked me one day, I was in my mid-60s, and I said, for some reason, do you know what EPDs are? EPDs are expected progeny differences. So when you got cattle and you give them, you breed for a certain kind of a thing, maybe a certain look or whatever. And that's an EPD. You know, they just figure this out. It's all the science about it. And I told people that for some reason they upped the EPDs on speed in cattle. All the years I've been working with cows, and I couldn't outrun them anymore. So, and that was my excuse for cutting back on the hours. But, you know, the truth of the matter is, when you're working with a 1,200-pound animal and it wants to turn on you and you're 65, you don't have the same quickness as you did when you were even 40, let alone 30 or 20. And I started really getting a lot of gigs and stuff for my music and my playing. That was about 93 when I heard about cowboy poetry. I hadn't heard about it at all, and I had an old classmate of mine who wanted to be a poet. I used to give him a hand about it, and he asked me one time, he came by my place, this will make sense in a bit. He said, there's a cowboy poetry gathering in Medora, North Dakota. And I said, a what? He says, a cowboy poetry gathering in Medora, North Dakota. He said, I want to go down there and do some poems. And this guy had been, you know, in Vietnam, everything else like that, but he'd never been in front of people. So it was really making him nervous. So I finally told him, I said, well, heck, I'll come on down there and I'll bring Judy and the kids. And that was the gal I was going with at the time. I said, we'll make a day of it. I'll see what's going on. I'll stand out. He was used to giving his poetry to me. So he knew, and I knew, if I was in the back or wherever it was, and he could set his eyes on me, he could get on that stage and he could recite whatever he needed to, the poems. So I stood in the back of the auditorium, and the place is full of people, and I've been watching people, and I thought, well, for crying out loud, I do this. But I didn't know there was a place to do it. So the next year I went down, that would have been 93, and that's when I started really working at, I really upped my craft is what I have to say. Because I was writing poems that were cowboy poems. I'd finish them and I'd put them in a box because I never did them in a gig. So that, for me, Medora, North Dakota, that was the turning point on doing poetry and music. And once I started working full time, as well as I do, that's where you get your inspiration, is from your work, whatever you're doing.
In the spring of 2002, DW Groethe was interviewed by folklorist Jens Lund, which led to DW's first invitation to the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada. In the foreword to DW's book, West River Waltz, Jens Lund said this: "It was a great privilege to have met this remarkably talented artist and to have had a hand in helping a wider audience discover him. It would be pleasant for me to congratulate myself on DW's discovery, but the fact is, the man is so good that it was only a matter of time before his talent would have been noticed outside of his region."
Jens Lund. Jens. Jens, but it's Jens. And he was going through North Dakota. He got hired by the state of North Dakota and Montana, the east and west parts of those two states, to go out and find out what kind of folklore and folk life was out there. And by one trail to another, he ended up hearing about me, so he came over just to interview me. It wasn't for Elko. It was for those states that got together, the folklorists, and they wanted to know who was out there for talent, the kind of people they were looking for. And I was, I guess, one of them. So he comes by and he interviews me, Jens Lund. He said, "You ever been applied to Elko?" And I go, "Well, no," because I really didn't understand Elko. I knew what it was, but I didn't know the caliber they were looking for, or really what was the basic requirements. He called up Meg the next day. I gave him one of my tapes. A couple of days later, I ended up, there was right when the people were meeting, the team was meeting to make the selections. And I made a selection. That was in 2002, so I got invited to play here 2003, first time. And I thought, well, geez, these are the people just like me, And I've been here on and off ever since, mostly on. I think it's only been 2 years I haven't made it out here. I haven't been invited.
DW Groethe is both a poet and a songwriter, and I asked him to talk about what his process is once an idea or a line pops into his head.
Well, first off, it's either a poem or a song, and they're not the same. And as soon as I get something down on paper, that's why, see these little books? I've carried these books around since I was in high school. And as soon as I get an idea, I write it down. Because my theory is, if you've got about, like, say, 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds to write it down, or God will give it to somebody else, So I put them down in my book, and then I'll go back over and ferret through them, and I think, okay, that might be a good idea, and it might be a good song. So I learned early on, you can't force a melody on a poem. The piece is either a poem or it's a song. And I write both. Generally speaking, if I get that first verse done, I'll know. With poetry, And I'll do, I do the traditional meter and rhyme, and I'm pretty critical about that. And with the rhyme, I don't like a slant rhyme, though I've used them. Saddle and cattle is a classic, and that's just accepted as a right. If you think about it, saddle and cattle are pronounced basically the same, even though they're spelled different. You get that sound in them. So there's those kind of exceptions, but really, when I craft a poem, it's about the word, and it's about how they relate to each other, and I like keeping them shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, so that what I've got in the piece is the absolute essence of it. And that's the poetry end of it, and whether it's free verse or not. And sometimes I'll just find an old style of poetry, like limericks or something like that, and just make myself write poetry in those various styles, because you'd be surprised what you come up with the way rhythms go. Like one of my favorite rhythms is like a bunch of the boys was whooping it up in the Malamute Saloon. I just love that rhythm. I like this old. So I write like something that catches you like that. So you get a good poem, it should have a good rhythm to it, because it just rolls in off your soul, as far as I'm concerned. But then songs, sometimes the melody comes first, sometimes the lyric comes first. They're just for me. I'll be singing it along. In fact, I've been known to call when I used to have a landline, I'd call home and hum the melody and the darn thing. So I'd have a recording of it at home, because I'd be out, fencing or chasing cows or doing something like that. And that's a whole different riff. And with songs, it never bothers me, and it never seems to bother anybody if you rhyme saddle with cattle, because that's just the way it is. You get slant rhymes is what they're called, I guess. I know by the time the first verse, and sometimes just the first 2 or 3 lines are down, whether or not that's going to be a poem or if it's going to be a song. And because with songs, it's not always the melody that comes first. It probably boils down to the cadence of the line. And if you think about it and you tear them apart between songs and poems, if you listen to poems that have been put to music, you'll notice that they've rewritten parts of them so it fits the music. Because the meter for a poem rarely works for the meter of a song. So for me, they're two entirely different things. And I just start writing it down. I've got right here. You carry these around. I got tons of these things. And if I have ideas, I write them down. That's all these are. I'm just looking down here now to see if there's any of these things I should be... Okay, here's just 2 words I thought of the other day. Hollow echoes. You can go a zillion different ways on that, but I was just sitting there, I was working on something around the house, and that phrase just popped into my mind, hollow echoes. You can go a lot of different directions with those 2 words. So I write it down, because I'll guarantee you I wouldn't have remembered it 5 minutes later.
We better be careful. Someone listening to the podcast might steal that before you write a song.
Doesn't make any difference, because I can still use it. All I got to do is be better than them.
That's right.
Yeah, if I get an idea, I write it. That's what these books are all about. And actually, when I was cowboying, I'd use this thing, and my ideas would start from the front, and then from the back, I'd put out what my day work or whatever I had to do, write that down. So, and when they met in the middle, then I get another book. I'm essentially, most people don't believe this, but I'm a loner. There's a lot of times I'll get up in front of people. I like being on a stage, but I don't like being a lot on stage. The reason cowboying appealed to me, I think, was just because I was out there by myself 99% of the time. And if you're working with somebody, that's fine, but you're usually, it's not a big crowded world. It's just, you and everything out there. That's just space. I really liked cowboying a lot, and it worked well with my temperament, I guess, because I could spend so much time, with just me and the critters. And even when you're working with people, like if you're branding or whatever like that, it's a mad rush. But it doesn't last all that long, just a few hours, and then pretty soon you're back out there fencing because some stupid cow broke the stupid fence and nobody else wants to do it, but I do, because I like being alone. I like that one too. I wrote that for a friend of mine who moved up to Bainville with his wife, and he had one kid at the time, and then they had two, and he went cowboying. Give him a horse and saddle and the wide rolling plains, a cabin with his gal by his side. Oh, it don't take much to make a cowboy a king. All he needs is a place to ride. Sweet dreams of someday owning a little place he can call his own. He'll have a grin as big as all of Montana when he climbs on his pony and rides. On Sagebrush Flats, not far from the river, where them rocks reach for the sky, he can see corrals and a fine herd of cattle with his brand hanging proudly on their side. Thinking about it drives him crazy, though he knows in times dreams all come true. And so until that day he'll be more than contented to climb on his pony and ride. Sweet dreams of someday owning a little place he can call his own. He'll have a grin as big as all of Montana when he climbs on his pony and rides. No, it don't take much to make a cowboy a king. All he needs is a place to ride. How's that one?
Great. Thanks for doing that for me.
Oh yeah, no problem.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank DW Groethe for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about DW at cowboypoetry.com/dwgroethe.htm. I'd like to thank Republic Boot Company for sponsoring today's episode. You can find out more about Republic Boots at republicbootcompany.com. I'd like to thank the Western Folklife Center for providing a space to record this interview. You can find out more about the Western Folklife Center at westernfolklife.org. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help me keep it going, you can make a donation on the website. Or you could leave me a review and a rating on the iTunes store. Or you could simply take the time to tell a friend to listen to the show. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.